This is chemistry for Tuesday, August 25th. Today we're going to be talking about lab equipment. Now, one note as I get started on this video, I will be going through each piece of equipment relatively quickly. So you're going to want to pause the video after I've named the tool and what it's used for. Otherwise, you won't be able to keep up. I do this for two reasons. One, because I do want you to pause the video and write things down. And two, so that the video doesn't have to be so long. I'm having some challenges getting videos to upload when they're too long. All right, so the first piece of equipment we want to talk about today are called beaker tongs. Now, a tong just means it's a tool that kind of has the hinge there in the middle, right? And hopefully the word beaker in front of it tells you it's used to pick up beakers. Right? We'll talk about beakers here in a moment, but hopefully you guys know what those are. Especially we'll use these when the beakers are hot. Right? If we've been heating them above a Bunsen burner, you're going to want to use beaker tongs so you don't hurt yourself. Now, there are two things you can see to recognize that these are beaker tongs as opposed to some other kind of tong. And that is the black rubber coating here on the end. Right? That black rubber will help grip the beaker so it doesn't slip even when it's wet. And again, it's got that black rubber. It's curved so it can go around the beaker. So our first item here, beaker tongs used to pick up a beaker. The second item here are crucible tongs. So they're tongs again, a place where you can put your hands or your fingers. There's a little pivot point here. But these look a bit different than our beaker tongs. Now, hopefully it makes enough sense. If the beaker tongs picked up beakers, the crucible tongs would pick up crucibles. Now, while the beaker tong had black rubber here, the crucible tong does not have any black rubber at all. And furthermore, it has this little horn here on the end. It's got this little uptick. When you're picking up a crucible, I'll tell you about those later, you want that horn pointed up. That makes it easier to use. So again, our crucible tongs are used to hold our crucible. Third item is a burette clamp. Burette clamp. That's what this thing here is in the middle, kind of looks like a butterfly, this gold metal piece here, or maybe it's plastic. It is used to hold a burette, right? A clamp, right? It's clamping the burette. You can see the clamping here. Both sides of the clamp here have the two black dots. Used to hold a burette. So you might ask, what's a burette? Well, here is a burette. The burette's that big, long glass cylinder. These things can be pretty long. I think the ones we have in chemistry here at school are about 2 feet long. What I want you to notice here is the burette at the bottom is this little piece here at the very, very bottom. So burettes are used to precisely, and I want to stress this word precisely, measure the volume of a liquid. This is a little valve down here, and it can let out one drop of liquid at a time. That's how it's precisely measuring that. So this is a very narrow cylinder. I think these go up to 50 milliliters maybe. But the key thing is they can precisely measure the volume of a liquid. Okay. Equipment piece number 5 is a Bunsen burner. A Bunsen burner, if you can see here, right, what's it do? Burner hopefully gives you an idea that it's used to burn gas, to heat things up. We'll use these a lot in our chemistry class. The Bunsen burner, we have a whole section on Bunsen burners later on, but there's a couple different pieces, right? There's a little valve here, another little valve here, and the flame will come out the top, and we connect this rubber hose up to the gas line in our classroom. Our sixth piece of equipment is called an Erlenmeyer flask. Lovely, fun name there, Erlenmeyer. What do we use this for? We use it to hold liquids. We use it to hold liquids, right? So we can pour something into here to use it. Now, the other thing about holding the liquids, if you note the shape of this, right, it's wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. That shape makes it really useful to swirl and mix some liquids and chemicals. We can put multiple chemicals in here. You can kind of swirl it around, and that shape helps prevent that liquid from splashing out. You don't want it. It helps contain that liquid for us. So an Erlenmeyer flask holds liquids. We use it to swirl and mix them. We do not use them for measuring. Even though there's these little gradations, these little white lines here on the side, and there's numbers by them, we do not use those for measuring. There are much different tools we use. We learned about the burette here a bit ago. But these are just to give you an idea how much there is. Use them as a guideline. We do not use those for measuring. Seventh piece of equipment, clay triangle. These little white pieces here, these are clay. We'll use this in something we'll talk about later on about our standard setup. Clay triangles are used to hold our crucible. Our crucible will sit right in the middle of this clay triangle, and that helps hold it over the flame. Clay handles heat very well, so this is a good way to put our crucible in there, and we don't melt the wire. Right, the clay will help hold our crucible over that hot flame. So you might ask what a crucible is. I've already talked about it twice. Equipment piece number 8. This is what a crucible is. Sometimes they're made out of ceramic, like porcelain, and sometimes they're made out of steel. But they're just these tiny little bowls. They could be the size. Maybe you could stick a thumb inside of one of these, and it would sit tightly on your thumb. Or they could be a little bit bigger, but they're usually not all that big. Maybe the size of a small cup, down to something that would fit on a fingertip or a thumb tip. What do we use crucibles for? We use them to heat up solids. Right, so we'll put some powders or solids in here, and we'll use to heat them up. So like say a couple pieces of wire, we could stick it in the crucible, and we could heat it up, and the crucible would hold that solid wire until it gets hot enough and then becomes a liquid. Right, so we use crucibles to heat up solids. Our 9th piece of equipment is a funnel. Oh, but this is one you've seen before, right? It's wide at the top, it's narrow at the bottom. This allows us to easily pour liquids and solids. Doesn't matter which, it can help us with both. We can pour it out of our original container or some big container into a smaller container. 10th piece of equipment are goggles. Now, if you note here, we have 3 different types of goggles here. What do we use goggles for? They're used to protect our eyes. Very, very important. We use stuff in here that can hurt our eyes. We'll use goggles a lot. If you look at the one here up on the left, right, this just almost looks like a pair of sunglasses. The difference being that it's got a little bit, it kind of wraps around a little bit on the side here. The next piece is very similar. It sticks a little bit farther away from your forehead, and there are some vent caps here on the top, but it covers more, right? So on this first one, something could splash over the top to get into your eyes. This one, not necessarily the case. And finally, the third one here we have in the bottom corner. Look at this. It's got the shield here, the lens that you can look through, but this is totally covering the rest of your face here. Nothing's going to get into your eyes when you're wearing some of this. I guess it really could if you were really sloppy and you poured something. There's a couple little holes here for venting, but this is the best protection for your eyes. Now, if you wear glasses, this is the type of goggle that I would want you to wear in class, because these two, if you're wearing glasses, you're going to have to take your glasses off to put the other 2 goggles on. This one will fit over your glasses. Equipment piece number 11 is the pipette. Sometimes we call this an eyedropper. Right at the top of this, you can squeeze this little top piece in, and then you stick the bottom in a liquid, and it'll suck the liquid up when you release the top part. And we use that to move small amounts of liquids, very small amounts of liquids. 12th piece of equipment is a mortar and pestle. These are typically clay or ceramic, and there's a little bowl type thing here, and then the other piece here kind of looks like a microphone the way it is here, but this is rounded at the bottom, and you can take that, you put a solid in here, and you can use this to crush or grind that solid up into smaller pieces, make it more of a fine powder, right? Take a rock and kind of grind it up, or a chunk of salt and grind it up into a much finer powder. 13, this is called a watch glass. It's really hard to tell with this picture, but if you've ever seen a contact lens, right, it's about the same shape. It's kind of curved a little bit here, and in this case, this particular one, the curve is going up. If I flipped it over and set it on the table, you could kind of wobble it back and forth. It's got a slight curve. It's like a part of a sphere, part of a ball, but just a small piece of it. What do we use this for? We use this to cover beakers, right? To keep heat into a beaker or something. We use it to cover a beaker. The other thing we can use it for, if we flip it over so that it's curving up, we can put small amounts of chemicals on it, and we can hold small reactions, and we can observe them easily enough on this watch glass, hence the name watch glass. Equipment number 14 is a stirring rod. Typically, these are glass. The ones we're going to use in our class are glass. And literally, it is just a rod. It's a rod made out of glass, and we use it to stir things. Why is it glass? Glass doesn't react with too many things. A very stable substance. So making our stirring rods out of glass is helpful. But again, we use it to stir things. Test tube is our equipment number 15. Hopefully you guys have heard of test tubes or seen test tubes. It's literally a glass tube. It's round on one end. It's open on the other. And what do we use test tubes for? We use it to hold liquid reactions. So it's bigger than our watch glass. So we can put more liquid in here. But we use our test tube to hold liquid reactions. We do not use a test tube for measuring. Again, there might be white tick marks on here with numbers on them. Those are just guidelines. Test tubes are never used for measuring. There's only a few instruments we use for measuring. I'll make sure I call them out. 16, our graduated cylinder. This is one of those instruments we use for measuring. You can see the little marks on the side here, 20, 30, 40, 50, and there's little marks in between those, right? We use graduated cylinders to measure the volume of liquids. Now, we already talked about a piece of equipment, our burette earlier, and that measures liquids. The difference is the burette measures them exactly. It measures them exactly, or precisely rather, whereas a graduated cylinder, not as much. We'll typically use graduated cylinders to measure volumes of liquids because we don't need quite the precision of a burette. But so we will use these a lot. We have multiple sizes, little ones here like 10 milliliters. We have them going up to 100, and we have them even bigger. Equipment number 17 is an evaporating dish. This is just a little ceramic dish, maybe the size of a small cup. And what do you think we use that for? Well, the name kind of tells you. We use it to evaporate the liquid from some solids. Right, we'll put that above our Bunsen burner and boil away the liquid to leave our solid behind. Our 18th piece of equipment is our ring stand and clamps. And the way we've got it pictured here, we would actually call this almost our standard setup. There's a little bit different, so I'll put there. There's a base, and there's a tall metal rod, and then we have different kinds of clamps and rings that we will put on it. So what do we use the ring stand and clamps for? To support beakers. We'll eventually put a beaker on top of one of these rings to hold it, and the clamp can help hold a thermometer, hold something above that beaker. These are both of these two, the top and the bottom, we'll talk about those a little bit. But a ring stand and clamps. Number 19 is wire gauze, and hopefully that makes sense. It's a great description for what it is. It's made out of wire and a pattern that makes it look like a piece of gauze. We use that to support our beaker when we are heating it up on our ring stand and clamps. That'll sit above one of the rings to hold our beaker up. The other nice advantage that a wire gauze does is that it spreads heat evenly. So instead of having just that flame hitting the bottom of the beaker, if we use the flame to heat, if we put this wire gauze between our beaker and our flame, it spreads out the heat more evenly. Equipment number 20 are forceps. Sometimes we'll call these tweezers. We have some that are, these are about the size, maybe a little bit bigger than what you would use at home. These are pretty big. These are about 8 inches long. What do we use a forceps for? Well, it's not just to pull out splinters. We also use it to hold small objects and chemicals in chemistry class. And in fact, you'll see we'll use those in our lab video on Thursday. 21 is our wash bottle. Just like it says, we have a bottle full of water. There's this little tube that comes out of the top, and we can use it to squirt down and wash things off, particularly glassware. 22 is a test tube holder. You squeeze this part of the test tube holder, and it opens up. Your test tube fits in between these two ring kind of things here on the end, and it can hold our test tube. So what do we need a test tube holder for? To hold hot test tubes. Just like we use a crucible to hold hot, we use crucible tongs to hold hot crucibles. We use beaker tongs to hold hot beakers. We use test tube holders. Not sure why they're not called tongs, probably because of the shape, but we use them to hold test tubes. And finally, equipment number 23, probably should move this to earlier in our list, but these are beakers, and we use these a lot in chemistry class. What do we use them for? We use them to hold liquids, right? We use them to hold liquids. Now, kind of like the Erlenmeyer flask, we do not, even though they have these little tick marks on here, we don't use those for measuring. The only things we're going to use for measuring volume of liquid, if we need it precisely, we're going to use a burette. If we just need a quick method, we will use a graduated cylinder. We will never use beakers or Erlenmeyer flasks to measure volume. These are just guidelines. You can eyeball it real quick and see about how much you have in there. Number 24, utility clamp. Back a few when I showed the ring stand and clamps. This was one of the clamps that was on it. You can see the metal rod would go right through this piece. We screw it down here so it's nice and tight. The other end is a little rubber kind of curved piece here that fits nicely around a test tube. Oftentimes we'll use these for holding test tubes, and sometimes we'll use them for holding thermometers above our beakers. Right? Well, it can hold just about anything. That's why it's called a utility clamp. Number 25, test tube rack. What do we think we use a test tube rack for? Pretty descriptive. It holds our test tubes. Number 26, not the best picture, but this is a thermometer. This is an old school glass thermometer. In the middle here, there's some mercury, and that mercury will rise up or down in the tube depending on the temperature. And there's little marks on here. You can read the temperature off. We have nice digital ones we'll be using for our class. So again, when we use the thermometer for, we use it to measure temperature, heat. We will always use Celsius as our unit for temperature in chemistry class. It's a much more useful system and easier to use than Fahrenheit that we use here in the English system. Number 27 is a test tube brush. A test tube brush, if you look at it, it's just a wire handle with some little bristles here on the end, kind of long and narrow, real useful for cleaning a test tube. 28, scopula and spatula. Wonderful little names here. Scopula, if this is one on the left, it's kind of, if you think about it, if we had a metal tube and we kind of cut part of it off along the length. So this is kind of curved here like this. And we'll use that scopulas and spatulas to move powders. So the scopula can kind of hold it and scoop it up. The spatula, it's hard to see here, but this is a little flat piece. So looks kind of like a wire and it's flat on the end. If you think about what you have in the kitchen, you have spatulas in the kitchen, use them for flipping pancakes, things like that. So this end here is flat. And that's why the spatula here has the same kind of function. You can use it to pick up things. Our last piece of equipment I want to talk about is a spark igniter. Yeah, we'll teach you how to use these when you get back into school, but you hold this in the palm of your hand, you squeeze these two metal pieces together, it'll cause this little end to slide across the little metal grid here, and this will create a spark. We use this to light our Bunsen burners. All right, that was pretty quick going through our video today. I need you to study these. We will have a quiz on Friday that I'll ask you some questions about these different pieces of equipment. Thank you.